Well, welcome to our additions to Daniel, is what we're going through tonight. And we're also going to jump into history to lead us into the New Testament, because that's where we'll be going next. So we've got hundreds of years of history to go through, plus the additions to Daniel. So all will be done in an hour, no problem. So let's start. We read 3 additions to Daniel. The prayer of Azariah, and we read Susanna, and Bel and the Dragon. What were your initial impressions of these 3 books, which are in the Catholic Bible, but are in the Apocrypha in the Protestant Bible? And so Apocrypha means hidden things. That's what it means. Why they chose hidden things, not really sure. It may have been that these books were kind of in the background. It may also be that these books, so they were added to the Catholic Bible at a later point and weren't in the earlier Bibles. So it's kind of a, when were they added? What did they mean for the different communities? So they're not, in the Protestant traditions, not considered part of the Holy Bible as part of the scriptures, but they're still used in some of our songs that we sing on Sundays are based on Apocrypha books. Some of our liturgies based on Apocrypha books. So it's definitely still part of our faith, even if it's not part of scripture formally.
Gretchen, what does Apocrypha mean?
It means hidden things.
Okay.
So it's things that are hidden.
And this is going to be hard because you don't have a Bible to read. And you're using the screen to see people, and yet that's what we're, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so if any of you
gave us downloads.
What?
I did
Camille?
send it for the links to these books, but I know they're not.
I didn't print it out. See,
Okay.
That's my fault. You were smart, Camille.
So, and that's something, if you're ever looking for a new Bible, say your Bible's fallen apart and you need to get a new one. One of the things you can look for, like I have, this is a little pocket Bible. I used it when I was serving as a chaplain for a church camp one summer, and it's an there we go. It's an NRSV Bible, but it also has on it, it says, well, it's not getting clear, with the Apocrypha. And
I
so
need to
that's
get a
something
new
you
one.
can look for when you're looking for a Bible, if you want to have one that also has the Apocrypha. So if you are reading in a Catholic version of the Bible, the Apocrypha books might be a little harder to figure out where they are, because they're actually part of the scriptures. And so they're not divided out in that same way. But in the Protestant Bible, if it has the Apocrypha in it, then you'll get to the end of the Old Testament proper. And so after Malachi, then you'll get into the Apocrypha books. And then it has those broken out. And usually it'll also tell you where these books are in other Bibles or other traditions that accept these books as scripture, and might say that. Another good Bible, if you are ever looking for a good study Bible, is this one's a pretty good study Bible, the New Oxford Annotated Bible, the New Revised Standard Version with the Apocrypha. And they have different editions. I've got the augmented 3rd edition. But in here at the start of each chapter or each book, it tells you some of the historical background for the book. So all the things we've been going over in class, if you don't remember them, like you could get something like this in order to look that up and have that right at your fingertips. And it also has this type of study Bible. This is for a little more serious study, like study more of reading. Seminary students often use this one. And yep, John says he's got this one in paperback, which would be great. I've gotten a hardback because
Mhm.
That's what they recommended in seminary, but it has at the bottom little notes.
Yep.
And in those notes,
Yep.
those are more extensive than the notes you have in your Bibles, probably if you don't have a study Bible. Every Bible has little translation notes at the bottom.
Mhm.
But a study Bible like this would also have some of the historical context. Or one of the things that's even more helpful is where in the Bible does this connect with? Because there's
Mhm.
many things that we read about that are echoes of previous books.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of fun to be able to see where those connections are. And a Bible like this can help point that out to you.
Gretchen, you've mentioned several different Bibles. Is there one you would recommend? I want to get a different Bible because I'd like to see some of the stuff I can't find, because I just have the one I got when I was confirmed. So
Do you want a study Bible?
maybe.
So this would be, I
Yep,
think, one of the
that's a
best
good
study
one.
Bibles.
That is
Which
very
one, the
good.
New Oxford? I wrote that down. The New
Mhm.
Oxford.
The New
Annotated.
Oxford Annotated Bible.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
if you want, Toby, I know you'd want the one with the Apocrypha. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
get the New
Mhm.
Revised Standard Version. That uses the newer, just from the Dead Sea Scrolls and things. It includes translation knowledge from that. And then with the Apocrypha.
Do you know if they carry that at the bookstores, or do you have to order it?
I don't know. They might.
Okay.
You might check down at the Rainbow Shop. I
never thought of that. Yeah.
think they may have it down there.
Ask them. Even if they
Mhm.
don't have it, especially if they don't have it, it's good to ask them so they know that these are the types of Bibles that they should be carrying. Because I
Mhm.
wish they
Yep.
did carry more
Yeah.
of these types of Bibles too.
I'll put down Rainbow Shop.
And you
Mhm.
can probably just call them.
Oh, I didn't think of
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah. No, I once got a Bible that was in historical chronological order. Drove me crazy. I got rid of that puppy so fast.
Yeah, and that's a struggle in like chronological order. Whose chronological order?
Right.
That's also debated.
Yeah.
So you're getting a lot of
Yeah.
somebody else's interpretation of the translation in there.
Mhm.
John
Well, I
also
told you
said Barnes and Noble. I'm sure you can get it from Barnes and Noble too.
Mhm.
I told you before this class, I thought the whole thing was chronological. I didn't know that, because the first books of the Old Testament are, and all of the New Testament is. I made the assumption all the rest of them were absolutely, the same.
In order.
And that was one of the big things I realized, is that
Mhm.
it isn't. It's,
Sometimes time is what's most important, but when you have a book that's not a history book, there's sometimes things that are more important than time. And the Bible is trying to move us through our faith lives and through a story, and the time on a calendar is not what's most important for us when we're walking through that. So initial impressions of the 3 books that we read.
They're a lot easier than what we've been reading before for me. All
Me
three of them
too. I
easier to read. Really?
really enjoyed the last 2 sections, Susanna and David in the lion's den. Those 2 I could understand. The other one was mainly prayer.
Yes.
Yeah.
The prayers, Azariah is a prayer, and
Yeah.
there's only, I think, 1 paragraph of prose.
Mhm.
John said it's different than reading the rest of the Bible.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, this it kind of falls into folk tale, and folk tales are always easier to read than some of the other pieces that we had too.
Well, Susanna was the name of my grandma. I love that.
Ah.
Oh, really?
Susanna. Yeah. So I like that. That caught my eye right away. So I read that twice.
Did she also have the wits and the strength and courage of the Susanna in the Bible?
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. She's a very strong lady, very strong German lady. You're right. Yep.
Well, getting back to Azariah, the very first verse says, they walked around in the midst of the plains, singing hymns to God and blessing the Lord. Then Azariah stood still in the fire and prayed aloud. I guess if I were in the middle of a fire and there were flames all around me, and we learned from reading Daniel that it was what, 49 times hotter than a normal fire, because everything
Killed
in
the
the
people
world
who
was,
threw them in.
yeah, yeah, and kill the people who threw them in. And anybody that was standing anywhere close. I guess I would stand and pray a heck of a lot too.
But then at the end, didn't they, there was all three of them there, and they weren't really in the fire then. If the fire was put out, right? Did I read that right?
Mhm.
I couldn't run it off the copy because I don't have a printer. But
Mhm.
I thought at the end, the three men were saved from that fire.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
they were.
this is in addition to Daniel. This
Mhm.
one would be inserted in between Daniel 3:23 and 3:24. And so Daniel and his friends were thrown into the furnace, and the furnace, although it killed those who threw them in, did not even like harm a hair on their head or
Right.
their clothes. Didn't singe them at all.
No.
And they looked in the furnace and saw all these guys walking around in the
Walked
furnace.
around.
And we're like, this isn't working. Like, obviously their God is with them. We need to get them out and stop trying to burn them. And
Well,
so this
guess-
prayer is like a snippet as part of this story of what were they doing in that furnace? Because we get kind of the larger, like they're walking around in there, but here this gives us a prayer of one of the men who is standing in the furnace.
Yeah. Well, it says, but the angel of the Lord came down into the furnace to be with Azariah and his companions, and drove the fiery flame out of this furnace, made the inside of the furnace as though a moist wind were whistling through it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So not even like a North Dakota wind. This was
Yeah.
like the breeze off of a beach on a sunny day.
Mhm. Can't you just imagine some of the other guys, if glasses were invented by then? My golly, I need another prescription.
Toby, you're muted.
Can you imagine what they were thinking if they were in this?
Mm,
Yeah,
It were real. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with Camille. Like, I'd be praying. It'd probably be
Oh.
like, oh my God, I can't believe we're alive.
Yeah.
And I mean, they start with, blessed are you, O Lord. I mean, I'd start with that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
For
sing a
every
little
stanza.
more than gee, thanks.
Yeah. Worthy of praise and glorious is your name forever. For sure. We're standing in the middle of a
Yeah.
furnace and we're not burning.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it says somewhere they did not feel any pain or distress. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Have we heard that before?
Yeah.
Yeah. So noting places where there is repetition in the rituals that are said and in words that are important to us. And repetition's so helpful for remembering things too.
Well, in the song, the three Jewish, it was repetitive all the way, like stanzas. At the end of each one, it was, and praised and highly, be praised and highly exalted forever. And then something else, and it kept saying it over and over and over again throughout the whole prayer.
And John
Repetitive.
added,
Yep,
John added
some-
too that there's a note that the Jewish tradition calls the
calls
angel Gabriel.
Gabriel.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And we hear that again.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite parts of this is the just the bless the Lord portion
Mhm.
towards the
Mhm.
end. Like, Bless you, heavens, you angels of the Lord, all the waters above, all the powers, the sun and the moon, the stars in the heaven, the rain and the dew, the wind, the fire, the heat. The fact they bless the fire and the heat while they're in the story, the winter cold and the summer heat, like the dews and falling snow, nights and days, and on and on and on. The blessings that they raised up. And I know when I read this again, I first listened to it in audio, and I was like, "Is it ending soon?" And it just kept going, because I didn't see. I was like, "Oh yeah, it is. Bless the Lord," again and again and again and again, and a lot of repetition, like, but of all different things, of all the seasons, all that which we encounter in life itself, and all that which we encounter not just in the furnace, but that we encounter out in the world too. And so, and that brings to the point that John brought up too. This is a communal prayer and not a prayer for themselves in particular. And so it is a prayer that is shared with a community. It's not just a private prayer. If it was a private prayer, it wouldn't be a part of the collections at all. It probably wouldn't have been written down. Most of the prayers, as they're said, are recorded in scriptures or recorded down, are prayers that are being recorded for a greater purpose too, to be shared within community. We see that with Jesus as well. One of the scriptures for All Saints and All Souls Day is the story of Lazarus. And Lazarus who died, and Jesus calls Lazarus out from the tomb. And as Jesus calls Lazarus out, Jesus says, "Father, thank you for hearing my prayer." But we never, and then he goes on to say, I prayed this aloud so that the people may know of your glory. And he explains why he prayed what he just prayed aloud. So which we hear that, and in his prayer, he's explaining why he's praying. But what we don't hear is the prayer that he must have said beforehand, that he's thanking God for having heard him. And that's not part of scriptures. So there's private prayers and then also communal prayers. And prayer isn't just an individual thing, especially when we think about our communities and our Christian faith, and in Judaism too. Community is so important. It's not the individual that's being lifted up, it's how are we in community with one another that's lifted up. And so whenever we're reading, thinking about, we have a tendency just in American culture, because we're more individualistic. And so we think about, what does this mean for me? But we have to remember, when we're reading the Bible, it's actually being written predominantly to be heard. What does this mean for the community and me as part of the community?
And I believe very strongly in the power of prayer. I have a very, very dear friend who suffered a stroke 2.5 weeks ago. And I visited her the day after she was admitted to the ICU. And when I saw her, her right hand was just flopping all over the place. And she needed help to get up. She needed help to walk. That right leg was very, very, very weak. And as I left, I told her how very important rehab was going to be for her, but I've nursed a lot of people in that situation, a lot of people. And as I was leaving the hospital, I thought it is going to take her months and months just to start feeling good. 2.5 weeks, and we went to a women's meeting day group, which we both belong, and she has a little trouble with putting thoughts together. Her right hand is almost rehabbed beautifully. She walks like a champ, and I'm thinking that's because between her husband and myself, we had half the city of Bismarck praying for her. I
Mhm.
believe in miracles.
That's right. I believe that too.
She's a walking miracle today.
Yeah.
I had a powerful experience regarding prayer many years ago. I used to go to a Bible study early on Tuesday morning. Monday afternoon, I saw a friend. I said, I'll see you in the morning. That Monday night we got the call about Mark's accident. And so at four in the morning, and I called my friend back and said, I won't be there. Mark was seriously injured. And so I'm driving alone to Fargo at 4 in the morning. Ed had to stay home for legislature and then leave the next day. I'm 4 in the morning, I'm cruising down the interstate. And at that 30 years ago, there wasn't that much traffic. And I wasn't thinking of any, I was just thinking about Mark and what they told me about him. And all of a sudden, I am not kidding, I had this tremendous hug, very physical, as if somebody was holding me really, really
Mhm.
tight.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow. And I looked at the clock, it was 6:35. These women were gathered around in a circle and they were praying for me and for Mark. Boy, I mean, it was so physical. If I hadn't believed in prayer, I sure would that time, but I had,
Mhm.
I'll
Oh,
never forget that. 30 years ago.
I can definitely relate. For me, it was just a couple of years ago. I was sitting at Mayo and waiting to go to an appointment for my eye. And on the way from my room to the lobby, I was feeling a little anxious, a little frightened. And I sat down in the lobby for just a moment before I crossed the street. And I could just feel like a blanket of comfort. And I thought, my church family is praying for me. And I just knew it. I just knew it. And everything from that moment on was just a blessing. Everything.
Mhm.
We better move on.
These are important stories.
Yes,
Yes.
it's very important. Yeah.
Susanna, the story, but I love how Daniel proved that those two elders were lying. They had good lawyer. He did a good job
Yeah.
separating
I like,
for testimony.
Well, I
Because she'd been
underlined.
condemned. She'd been condemned.
Oh,
Hmm?
yeah. I underlined verse 9. They suppressed their consciences and turned away their eyes from looking to heaven or remembering their duty to administer justice. I mean, they were being guys that
Mhm.
allowed their morality to slip a heck of a lot.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, while they were ready to attempt rape. I mean, that's where they were. And
Mhm.
so it kind of points out, like, I mean, how do we need to hold on to our consciousnesses, and if we're not willing to look towards heaven, maybe we're not like actually doing things we should be doing at all, and maybe we're really lost at that point in time.
Mhm. But I think it's a reminder that sometimes we can really be seduced by what the world has to offer rather than trying to aid our spiritual selves from growth. And sometimes that's a very subtle pull, and you don't really realize you're sliding down the wrong path until something wakes you up and says, I don't want to go there. I just don't want to go there. I have a mantra whenever I feel threatened, even a little bit. My faith and my trust is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. And I just repeat that over and over until it is so much a part of me inside that nothing is going to sway me from my relationship with God. I sound like I'm preaching tonight. I'm gonna keep my mouth shut.
No, you're not.
So
Good,
one
Camille.
thing about Susanna, so it's included as in addition to Daniel, but it may also not have originally been a tradition addition to Daniel. And a couple of reasons why. So the people who have turned away from God in this story are the judges or the elders, and they're not people from another culture, which is more of what the rest of Daniel's story is about, living in exile and the kings or the courts of these other cultures coming in conflict with the Jewish religion and understanding of the world and God. And so this seems to have a slightly different theme than the rest of the book of Daniel. And so it might have been that this story, well, we know the story was probably added at a later date, and it may not even have originally been Daniel that was the one that in the story who helped to trap the elders and point out their own immorality and wickedness to themselves and to the wider community as well. But at this point, but it has been connected with Daniel just throughout tradition too. So Daniel is a good book to read if you have anybody who says, I like a good like detective novel. You just give them the book of Daniel.
Because in the Priest of Bel, he does another good thing for trapping the wrongdoers.
Yeah.
Putting the ashes on the floor. I thought that was pretty clever.
Yeah, that was. If you're devious.
Any other things about Susanna?
I thought it was very interesting how Daniel supposedly caught them in the lie, separating them and questioning them separately. I think the police definitely use that on occasion to see what the truth is or lack of thereof.
Yeah. One of the
And
things
he
I
would-
like about this book is that it really emphasized the search for the truth, in that the truth is what justice is based on. It's not that how the culture is based, which is often how we determine justice, is who can present a better argument or what our culture finds acceptable or unacceptable. Sometimes that becomes how it becomes justice. Instead, this is really focused on what was the truth within this.
My Bible, it says, after she was condemned by the false stories by the elders, that Daniel said, I want no part of shedding this woman's blood. That's what it said. And that's what, and then he went to interview these elders separately. And he stood up for her.
And that's what made him great. In the story, he didn't just wash his hands clean of it. He also said, I want no part of this, and I'm going to do something about this so that there is justice in this. He wasn't passive. He didn't just say this is wrong and walk away. He took action too.
Wow.
And saved her life.
It came down to a tree. It was either the mastic tree or the evergreen oak. Isn't that something? It did. It did. One said the mastic tree and the other one said the evergreen oak. So it's like, okay, who's lying here? Yeah, I found that interesting, that chapter. I really did. I've read it several times. I wish I had a copy of it, but I could go through it.
Those two, under an evergreen oak, and they're also a word play in Greek, and so it's also a pun that's being put forward. So
Okay. even gets more interesting.
So it's even more interesting in Greek then, because you got a bit of a very punny storyteller here.
Mhm.
I thought that was clever for way back in those days already. I mean, really, to think of all that.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Well, how about Belle and the Dragon?
That was interesting too. I
Mhm.
like that too.
This one probably goes back to the Persian period. So the other ones, we've connected more with the Babylonian period, we think, as far as setting. But this one's probably Persian period.
Mhm.
Another detective.
Yeah.
Detective
ashes on the floor.
Daniel.
Mhm.
Very
Yeah,
much a Sherlock Holmes section.
Right.
Yep.
I like
And
how
then
he
he
was like, let
destroyed.
me put ashes on the floor.
Yeah.
And the king's like, see, it worked. They ate of it. Nah, look, there's footprints.
Yeah.
Is this the one where he killed the dragon without a sword?
Yes.
Yeah, that's in there too. Yeah. Okay. Like I
Yeah.
said, I don't have the chapter in front of me.
Well, you have a good memory.
So. Okay. How many days was he in the den? And finally, the Lord came and rescued him. But then
6 days.
6 days. Yeah. Okay. 6 days. I thought it was almost a week. Yeah.
You know,
All right.
I've always had trouble with the Old Testament because as they, there are a lot of Dead Sea Scrolls that haven't been picked up. And we're finding more of them. And so it's like, what made it into the Bible? What didn't make it into the Bible? But it, to me, is the history that is so important for the coming of Christ. And that's the part that I get from it, because I don't know, I don't take so much of it because it's just one period of time with a few people. I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but it's with everything combined. It's the creation of the earth, that God created the earth, and then that God talked about the coming of Christ, and then it's the history of the Jewish people.
Mhm.
And that's what I think is significant about it. And when I was young, I got all upset when they found new scrolls, because I thought, well, how can they have new scrolls with the Bible's the way it is? And then that's when I really realized, no, it isn't. These scrolls could have been put in if they had, if they had been found or had earlier. So that's the way I look at the Old Testament. I don't, I think it's beautiful but it's also very violent. Which,
There's a lot of violence.
right. And in the New Testament, there's violence in the end, but there's also great redemption.
Mhm.
I'm glad we have the New Testament.
Mhm. Something tells me we would not have the New Testament without the Old Testament. We had to start somewhere. And I know so much of it is so harsh. And some of it doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense to us today at all. But I think it is through the Old Testament they started to go from a ton of gods down to one God, and then unfortunately they had a lot of mystique around the one God, and but it still led to what we call Christianity today. It's part of us. I don't think you can have the New Testament without the Old. Okay.
Yeah, the New Testament definitely relies on the readings within the Old Testament. And to remember too that the Bible isn't just formed from the scrolls that were found, but throughout all of these periods,
Mhm.
Judaism is still an active religion. And so what's being included is the readings that are being used by the community. And so that's part of what determined what would go in the Bible. It's the ones that throughout generations, people kept going back to and kept finding meaning in and depth in and ability to see God in new ways. Because Jewish tradition too also has really rich writings that are not considered scripture, but that would be secondary to scripture, that would be reflections upon scripture. And it's a common that you would deeply study and question the Bible, and it's more about a lifetime of study than just an accepting a one-time document type collection. But that these
But then-
they're kind of a collection, not just a collection from old, like it's not just a collection of they found this and then this looks like what would be the complete Bible, so let's just take all these, but more of over time, these are what people used and that's why they were included.
But that, see, to me, I don't know. There are scrolls being found now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, those weren't found then.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just happenstance. Okay, what if those had been found before? You know, and they're still finding Dead Sea Scrolls in some of the caves. You know, so it's, and I wonder sometimes, I'd like to, we have a book here, we found one that had some of the first ones that they found, you know, that they published now. But there was some, just in the last couple of years, they found some more of them. And it's like, why don't we study those too?
And I don't think there's anything wrong with studying them as well. But for some reason, those stories didn't enter tradition, as far as they weren't picked up and used widely by the community. Even at the time that they would have been written, they weren't being used then widely by the community in the time that followed that.
But
So
how do we know that? We only know that because of written history.
Well,
And
they might
so
have
if
been,
that
but
wasn't
they,
there, then how would we know? Huh?
at some point they lost, they just weren't being used regularly. Otherwise, we would be more aware of them. They'd be in Jewish tradition then too.
Okay, in the Jewish faith that we have now. Yeah,
Right.
okay, that makes sense to me. Okay.
Other thoughts on Bel and the Dragon?
I think it's interesting how he killed it.
Yeah.
It is.
He, kill him with kindness. Feed him.
Freedom, yeah.
Oh, with pitch, fat, and hair.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
What is that?
I don't know. It probably was something that was meant to blow his innards out, and that's exactly what it did.
Yeah.
Isn't pitch like tar?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess dragons weren't known for their intellectual ability to discern what was good.
None of the ones I've known have had much.
Yeah, that's funny.
But,
Well, and how horrifying that would have been to the people who thought this was a divine dragon too.
Yeah, really.
well, it's always shocking when you stop to think of it, to have things that you believed in very strongly all of your life, to have them destroyed, even today, when Madeline Murray O'Hare's son became a Christian, it did not set really well with her. But just think of the revelation that came to that man, and coming to believe in a deity, coming to believe in God. Oh.
And John said, I was surprised that the king gave Bel over to Daniel to be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
In the story, I think in part the king assumed it was a god who could not be destroyed. And
Mhm.
so whatever Daniel tried would be impossible.
well, I think the footprints in the ashes probably pointed out to the king that some chicanery was about, and that's when he confronted his priest. The thing that really upset me is that he had not only the priest, but the wives and their children destroyed because he was angry. He had been duped. And I just wonder what they did with all the extra food. I can't imagine how they could eat that much every day. But
Well, sometimes
must
the
have been-
temple food would be used by those who work there, but then also to feed their families.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. I'm surprised the king did not do away with Daniel when he first mocked the king could thought of as his God, you know. Sometimes
John just wrote,
mhm. John just
Say that
wrote,
again, Camille.
and
Say
John,
that again.
I was surprised that the king gave Bel over to Daniel to be destroyed, a big extended family.
did they save women and
said-
children? Right,
Yes,
with priests
yeah.
in that hidden door for all that food,
Let me
all
see.
that food.
Yeah, so
I'm
this is
sorry.
with the ash on the floor. Daniel said, "Look at the floor," he said, "and notice whose footprints these are." The king said, "I see the footprints of men and women and children."
Mhm.
So, and as John said, they probably big extended family.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
John also
surely.
pointed out that Daniel must have been well respected to get this treatment.
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
Early on, did it talk about his relationship with the king and the respect the king had for him? Didn't they, early on, didn't they say that?
Well, not in just this piece of Bell and the Dragon, but it does in the book of Daniel. Daniel has
Before that,
risen
yeah.
up in respect and is very well
Right.
respected. And that's why some of the other leaders are going after him, because they don't like how much respect he's been receiving.
Mhm.
The first two verses, Louise, are when King Astyages was laid to rest with his ancestors, Cyrus the Persian succeeded to his kingdom. Daniel was a companion of the king and was the most honored of all his friends.
Right.
And I
Mhm.
think that's why he took so much guff from him without saying off with his head, you know?
Yeah.
So we have God who, we've got the history here that we're reading, it's in the Bible, but we also know that God has plans for the future now from there with the Son of God. And so where does this fit together? You know what I'm saying? Well, the Old Testament is, it's the history. You have each of these we've been reading, each, this happens and this, and there's retribution and there's somebody, a king or somebody in charge. But this is all leading up to the New Testament, right?
So some people call it the Old Testament and the New Testament. Other people call it the First Testament and Second Testament. Another usage is the Hebrew Bible, and sometimes New Testament's called the Continuing Testament. To emphasize that it's not that the New Testament supersedes the Old Testament, but it's a continuation of the story that's being told. in the Old Testament. So it's not just the Old Testament is history. The Old Testament is actually part of it's part of the New Testament too. And it's all part of this story of God at work in the world, and human beings struggle to understand God, draw closer to God with their, and be more aware of God, and to figure out what it means to live as people of God. And so what Jesus is doing, Jesus in number of places says, I didn't come to abolish the law. Like, I didn't come to replace anything from the Old Testament. And in fact, usually Jesus says things that are stronger in statement than the Old Testament laws even say. And so Jesus doesn't just say, don't commit adultery. Jesus says, if you even think about committing adultery, then you've committed a sin. Whereas in the Old Testament, if you committed adultery, there's some laws that'll kind of help you get out of that and figure out what to do with that. Unless you're a woman, then you'd probably just be killed. But there's some things that help you like wiggle around and figure that out. But Jesus doesn't give that wiggle room. He says, if you even think about it, you've committed that sin. And kind of re-looks at the same laws, and also continues what's already being said in these earlier things, and in a way reinterprets it for the people. Jesus doesn't necessarily bring something new, but he brings it in a new way.
Part of this is coming from my Lutheran background, because this is what we were taught. But there's this huge thing about the Old Testament is very harsh, very judgmental. There isn't a lot of I don't know, hope. I mean, it's fights and battles and who wins, who doesn't, people dying all over the place. And then the New Testament comes with this prophecy of, wonderful things. And it's the juxtaposition of the two of these that I find interesting, that they just are so different. And maybe they're not, maybe they're the same. I don't know, but they seem.
So a lot of the promises of wonderful things is Jesus quoting the Old Testament when you hear that. And so there's a lot.
Say that again.
So
I didn't understand that.
A lot of the promises of wonderful things is often Jesus quoting the Old Testament. So Jesus quotes the Old Testament quite frequently. And some of the promises that Jesus repeats to the people are promises that they already know because of their faith tradition, and it's part of the Old Testament. And Jesus is highlighting those. And so the promises that Jesus is bringing are also ones that the people already know too, and that are part of this Old Testament story.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's still a continuation and a build too. So it's kind of both.
Yeah.
And Jesus steps in. We'll get more into this. I've got some videos, maybe it'll help, about the Persian Empire formation, and then the Maccabean conquest and things too. So Jesus steps in when there's a division in Judaism. That's when Jesus is living. So there's a division between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So as we're going through history now, we've got the Persians, and then we've got the Greeks. And the Persians are interesting. Slavery was outlawed by the Persians. The Persians, as far as a lot of things that we consider to be good about modern society, the Persians were already doing. And then the Greeks took over, and the Greeks are built on slavery. And so there was a lot of backslide as far as human rights when the Greeks took over again. They did bring democracy, but a lot of not human rights. And so we've got that, but in Judaism, we start to see division because there's some people who are trying to convert others to Judaism, which and other people who are Jewish don't feel like you should be converting other people, that this is part of a bloodline, not something that you would convert people to. And so
Oh,
you have a
yeah.
disagreement upon through there.
Mhm.
And then you also that now you have, because the Greeks are everywhere, the Greeks are city states. So you have a diverse Greek population. There was never one like this is the Greek Empire. There wasn't unity like that. You had all these different city states. And so you have Jews who are also Greeks. They don't want to speak out against the Greeks because they are Greeks. And then you have people who don't like the Greek rule, who are going against the Greeks, and that causes a division too. And then you get a divide then within the theology itself, in part because of these other political and social divisions, but in part just different understandings of, do we follow the written scriptures only, or do we follow the oral tradition and the written scriptures? That's a huge division. Does resurrection exist or not? That's a huge division. And so you get these huge divisions, and that's when that places us to the time of Jesus's ministry, which is why there's so much in the New Testament between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and Jesus is often just speaking out against both of them, because they have been fighting for quite a while now about who's right. I'm right. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. And Jesus just like, neither one of you are right. Like, you're just not right. You have some things right, like at the core, that you've still kept and understood, the greatest commandments, the pieces of justice, but so much you've just gone back to what we talked about before. Quit doing your sacrifices, because that's not what's most important here. It's how you actually live your life, which comes out of the Old Testament, where they're saying that too. And so Jesus is walking into another conflict, and it feels more modern to us with Jesus's story than the Old Testament, in part because we've heard it so often. But it is a different culture that Jesus is stepping into, just like when we read about in the midst of the writings from the Persian period. In some ways, the Persian period, we still have things in our culture that are related with the Persian period and influences from Persia, but it feels so far away to us. And the Babylonian period feels even farther away to us. But the period of Jesus, that was quite a while for us too, and so there's cultural differences with that as well. So we'll get more into that. There's a lot of history. One of the things the Apocrypha can be helpful for is there's kind of a time period gap in between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. And so the Apocrypha can fill in some of that gap, as far as stories that were part of the traditions. And that's partly why it's really important too, and why it is good to study the Apocrypha as well, to try to fill in what was happening in people's faith lives. We also have more written on history by this point. There's a little more written. It's very biased, as history often can be. And so we have to take that with a grain of salt, but can paint a better historical picture of what's happening in between the Persian period to Jesus's day with the rise of Rome.
In years, about what is the difference? What is the time?
So let's see, Persian period would be like 520. Okay, it was 539 that Babylon is captured by King Cyrus of Persia. And so in the book in Daniel, we're walking in between the Babylonian period and the Persian period. So around the late 500s BCE, middle to late. So that's a good
It's a big chunk of time.
500 time period. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have during that time period, exiles are returning to Jerusalem. And as we read in the Minor Prophets, if you remember back when we started this, the Minor Prophets also talk about that return from exile. And there's division when people return, because you have people returning to land that other people are not living on. And that causes issues. We see that in our own cultures, in our own world. And so you have people returning, you've got change of empires. Persia is a huge force, and but then you've got the Greeks coming in too. And so the Persian king, we've got Alexander the Great defeats King Darius. And then Alexander the Great conquers Judea. And so that would take us around 332 BCE. Then we start to get the Greek influence upon the faith too. And so that becomes part of tradition as well. Because remember back to when we were reading Deuteronomy in Leviticus, we were reading about the laws. And the laws, as we read them in the Bible, there's religious laws, but there's also cultural laws. And there's no distinction written in the Bible between those, which is what makes it so hard to read it now, because it's hard to sort out, okay, what was actually a law from our faith, and what's a law that's just based on that culture. But that continues to be a problem too. What's accepted in Greek culture is not the same as what was accepted in Persian culture, which wasn't the same in Babylonian culture, and that impacts just how people are holding on to and living out their faith. Then we get around 165 would be the Maccabean Revolt. And so that's when the Jews rebel against the Greeks, and that not everybody agreed with that. That's where we get Hanukkah from. The season of Hanukkah comes out of that. And then Rome would be the Roman province of Judea would be around in the 60s, like 67 BCE. So that's when we start to get the reigns of Herods. So there's multiple Herods. So we've got Herod is in place as a puppet king, and then the lines of Herods, and you know the name Herod from the birth of Jesus, and with King Herod. So that's what kind of an overview what happens in those 500-ish years. Plus everything in the world happening too. We're so early on, we were much more localized, and as we've been walking through the Bible, it's become more and more globalized, and our understanding of global is increasing. And so what's happening in different parts of Greece, like we're going all like much farther, impacts this area of the world than it did before. We're not just as far as Egypt anymore. We're going a lot farther than that. John pointed out the Maccabees helped me a lot with the Greek influence.
Can you do Gretchen in a break or something?
Oh, here, come. Evan has something to tell you here. He just walked downstairs.
Gretchen, the sofa is in place.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Evan, for delivering the sofa. You're the man of the day.
Yeah.
We were making sure a sofa got to somebody who needed one.
Oh, good.
Right. Oh,
Nice.
Those are good times.
Hmm.
Any other thoughts before we close up tonight's Bible study?
This is the end of the Old Testament.
We have read all the books in the Old Testament.
That's pretty darn good. Being Lutheran and having, what was it, 4 years of confirmation where we did the New Testament, I'm really thankful to know more about the Old Testament because we sure didn't study that at all.
I am glad that you get to study it because it adds, I hope you'll find it adds a lot of depth now
Yeah.
that we're walking into the New Testament.
Hmm.
Well, it makes more sense. There are a lot of things that happen and,
Hmm.
you know, and it makes it more human.
Yep.
For the New Testament, let's just go in order of how the books are laid out. So we'll start with Matthew. So there's 28 chapters in Matthew. Would you like to do Matthew in one part or two parts?
Two.
Two? Okay.
two, because we get good discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we can also do some history too. John
Yeah.
wrote it too as
Mhm.
well. This is just gonna cut it in half. Not really any rhyme or reason, but we'll just cut it in half at 14.
Okay.
So we'll do 1 through
Okay.
14 and then 15 to 28.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And next class, we might include some of the history in between too. Just add some depth to it as well.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Yeah. That really completes it.
Yeah, because what's happening leading up to this, that impacts why Jesus is saying some things too, as far as what's going on in history. And so this is perfect read as we'll be entering into Advent soon.